Sure, great. If I may share my screen, I just put together a few slides kind of to frame the conversation if people find that useful. Um, all right, let me fix this up. Oops, what did I do here? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. Just put it in
Somehow,
presenter mode.
yeah, somehow I can't see my slides. I don't know why.
Oh, that's weird.
Let me stop sharing and reshare. They disappeared on me. There we go. All right. So I lost him again. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay. All right. Good. Um, welcome everybody. As mentioned, I'm Jim Brooks, and I'm joined by Kim Keil Stietz, who we fund. Actually, she was our inaugural funded program for our opportunity pool. She's at the University of Wisconsin, so she's closer to the beginning of her career. Walid Farhat is the chief of pediatric urology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a well-known researcher, more senior like me. Um, and we might be a little farther from the process. We wanted to cover how to run a research group, how to set up a research group. I just put together some slides for discussion, touching on the topics that were mentioned in the email. I want this to be casual, so feel free to jump in. I only have a few slides, and I really want this to be open and helpful for you. By way of disclaimer, I just want to mention that that this is really, from me anyway, is focused on starting a lab in an academic setting. I don't know anything about setting up a research group in industry. I've never done it. Maybe some of the other panelists have, but I'm not going to be very useful in that regard. Okay, so first of all, big picture. Big picture, when you start a new job as a faculty member at an institution, you have to know what your job is, and it could vary between institutions. So you need to nail down, at our place, you're judged based on teaching, service, and your research. And it's important that you understand what your position is, because that's what you're going to be judged on when you're promoted. So I would read the faculty handbook. You could ask other faculty members. I know when I served as associate dean for faculty affairs at Stanford, that they aren't always the best source of knowledge. Usually the dean's office, and especially faculty affairs, is the best person to talk to. But just know what your job is, and know what you need to be doing in your research group in order to get promoted. At our place, your research contributions are judged kind of like a three-legged stool. Um, and, this is not based on what impact factor your journal is, the journals are you're publishing in. I don't think that's used very much in the US, more so in Europe. But in fact, at our place, it's banned to look at impact factors, but it's judged based on how you're regarded by your peers. Publications are important for being judged. At our place, first and last author publications are assessed most closely. And remember, they're peer reviewed. So it's your peers saying that this is meritorious in, an excellent journal in your field. Research funding is, again, peer reviewed. And finally, your reputation evidenced by letters of support. So get out there and present at conferences. Some people do too much of that. They travel too much, but get your work out there. Meet senior people when you're at meetings, shake hands, because remember, they could be letter writers for you. And then leverage your network. So other people you trained with who've gone to other institutions, and get them to invite you to give talks. And when you give talks at another institution, pay attention to who the gray hairs are in the front row, because they also could be letter writers for you. So this is advice I gave to our junior faculty here. Let's get to the topic, the real topic today, which is running your laboratory. And I want to just cover kind of the big topics, such as, deciding what you're going to work on, networking, recruitment, working with trainees, funding, and leadership training. I think these are all really important topics. The first thing, questions. So what question are you going to work on? So I was always told to pick a big question, but not too big. Rather than saying I'm going to cure cancer, I want to work on screening and early detection in cancer, and prostate cancer in particular. That's framed my career. So ideally, those questions have a clinical tie to a clinical problem. Increasingly, funding is tied to solving health problems. So think about what your translational objective might be. Your question, as I said, should be, kind of reasonably sized, but also linked to your discipline, because you're going to be evaluated in your discipline. That said, some of the best questions span disciplines. I've worked with sociologists, epidemiologists, geneticists, statisticians. I've worked with a whole variety of people towards meeting my objective, my research objectives. So spanning disciplines often leads to the best questions. Ask yourself, when you get to a new institution, what are the unique opportunities there? So for instance, there could be a unique technology developed at your new institution. There could be a particularly strong research group that has techniques or knowledge, expertise in a field that will benefit your research, and think about how to work with them. I mentioned this at last year's CAIRIBU meeting. Your research question has to give you tachycardia. You've got to be excited about it because you need to sell it. You need to sell it to trainees you're recruiting, to funding agencies, to promotions committees. So this has to be something you're excited about. And think about, we tell our trainees, think about what, I hate this term, but what your elevator pitch is, because you have to be able to communicate with people when you're out networking and tell them in a kind of a very succinct way what you're interested in, what you're working on. Networking. So what is networking? Networking isn't just kind of randomly get to know people, but when you get to a new institution, if that's what happens, you have to make sure that people know who you are and what you're working on. So when I first got to Stanford, I came from Johns Hopkins, didn't know anyone here. I went and presented at different lab meetings for not just in my department, but outside my department in the cancer center and things like that, just so people got to know who I was. I also went to a lot of lectures. I still do go to lectures of topics I think that I might be interested in. In general, sometimes people come and think they should go work with a National Academy member. In general, I find that young colleagues are more receptive to collaborations and are oftentimes better collaborators because senior people often get all the credit, and you need to get credit when you're first starting out your laboratory in order to get promoted. That said, senior faculty can be very helpful, particularly senior faculty in your own department. And people who've been around the institution for a long time. I got great advice when I first came to Stanford. I met with a lot of senior people, Paul Berg and all kinds of other people that I had no business meeting with, but they said, hey, who you should go talk to is, and that was very helpful, getting off. The other thing is that those the more you network, those people can be peer counselors for you, peer mentors. They can alert you to possible hires. Hey, I don't have any funding for this person, but they look pretty good, and they'll send over their CV. That kind of thing really helps. Recruitment is hard. So I just mentioned that networking is a good way to find people. Particularly senior faculty, just ask them, I get requests fairly regularly for people to work in my laboratory. I send those over to junior faculty members. When you are talking to people, interviewing potential candidates, I always try and focus on asking them performance-based questions. And basically what that means is rather than asking an open-ended question about their research when you already know kind of what they've done, you've seen their talk, say, okay, tell me about a problem you ran into and how did you solve it? So that just gives you more of a feel for how someone thinks. Always, always, always check references. And even then, you still might not find out what you need to know, but checking references can be really critical. It's amazing what you can read between the lines. Hiring internal candidates, and by that I mean hiring someone who already works at the institution. It can be good because every institution has its own little quirks for how to get things done and how the system works and things like that. So a person who's experienced at that institution can be very helpful. But I also think that I've had some of those people that I've hired that have been at Stanford forever who also aren't very motivated. So whereas a young person who wants to go to med school or a PhD program is highly motivated and will work their tail off for you. So there's trade-offs there. But as I said, hiring is, I think, one of the hardest things we do. Don't beat yourself up if something doesn't work out. I still find this the most challenging thing to do. When you get a trainee, I like personally, I like to have one-on-one meetings with them regularly. My postdocs I meet with one-on-one every 2 weeks. We have weekly lab meeting. I'm always walking through the lab and ready to sit down and talk to people. So you need to touch base regularly with people and on a structured basis. I think it's very important where they can present the data that they're generating, the problems they're running into, and things like that. You have to remember to change your mindset also. Their success is paramount. No longer is it really about you, it's about their success. And remember, their success is your success. Them going and presenting at meetings, them getting faculty jobs and things like that. That's how you really build your legacy, more or less. Give them credit. And then recognize what their special needs may be. College students just want to get their hands wet and figure out whether they like research or not, whereas a postdoc needs first author papers, needs to build a program that they can take with them to grow at another institution, and also get them involved. I mean, I regularly have my trainees helping write grants or writing their own grants, encourage them to give talks, go to meetings and things like that, because they need to get those skills together in addition to everything else, in order to set up their laboratory when they leave. Funding. I have a lot on funding here because this is one of the scariest parts of it. The first thing is there's a lot of courses, and our institution offers grant writing courses to postdocs. It offers it to other students. Those tend to be really good courses. The AUA offers really good grant writing courses, both beginning and more advanced grant writing courses. I've sent several of my postdocs to those courses. They've raved about them. Have your colleagues read your grants. They can be junior or senior colleagues. Senior colleagues oftentimes can give, have been around the block and can give you more advice, but anyone, have them read your grants, which means you have to get your grants done early. When you're first starting out, start with the mentored awards and early career investigator awards. There's a lot of them. A lot of foundations and other institutions, ACS, for instance, the DoD, they emphasize new investigators, and that's a great way to get started. I started out with a DoD New Investigator Award. That was my first grant. So small grants and foundation grants are worth going after. If nothing else, you write a grant, right? And it's good to just get stuff on paper. I recycle grants. So if it doesn't get funded at one institution, it's going in, a foundation or something like that. It's going into another. Really important, I think, is to participate in study sections and grant reviews early on. Not, again, not too much, but it is really useful. And it was really useful for me to sit in and be able to see what a good grant is and a bad grant is and why. You'll learn a ton from reading other people's grants. Also, especially for clinicians, but really for anyone, think when you're thinking about funding, it ain't just R01 grants. Think broad portfolio. So I've gotten money from grateful patients, foundations, internal grants. Meet with, if most places there is a development officer associated with your department who helps with fundraising. Meet them, meet those people, give them a little write-up about what you're working on, and let them know, because they might have a donor come in with a very specific idea of what they're interested in. And if they don't know about you, they're not going to get the money to you. So that is another worthwhile thing to do, is to talk to development officers and let them know about your work. Leadership training. Leadership training, I think, actually helps. When I was an assistant professor, I took a leadership course at Stanford that gave you a 360 assessment from people you work with, but it also had different ways of teaching you or discerning, tests you take and stuff like that about what your leadership style is. I learned a ton about myself, about assumptions that I had that not everyone shared. So those courses can be very useful and help you be a much more effective leader. Realize that your leadership style is going to change throughout your career. So when you're younger, you're more of a peer with your trainees, as opposed to later on in your career. And because of that, things are different. And what you do is different or behave different. Final thing I want to mention is there are some good resources out there. This one I think is particularly good. This is from HHMI and the Burroughs Wellcome Fund, Making the Right Moves. This is a book that is online. You can just download it for free. And it breaks down these topics that I talked about and many more in great detail, and gives tremendous advice. So I've read this book. I read this book when I was an associate professor, I think, when it came out. And boy, I wish I had it the day I walked in the door. It's really good. Final thing I want to leave you before I sign off is that there are things I tell people to remember when they're junior faculty, and that is that recruiting a faculty member is expensive for the institution and time consuming. That means they want you to succeed. They're not your enemies. They are your friends. If you run into problems in your career, always take the high road. If you get in a conflict, think about how to frame it for leadership, and frame it for yourself. Like, what is my position? What is good for the institution? What's good for my department, rather than what's good for me? And the final thing is, you're not alone. Everyone was new once. You're going to have friends and mentors at your old institution, a new institution, who can help you out, and also in CAIRIBU. So you can lean on those people when when things are tough, or you having trouble getting funding or recruiting and things like that. And people will offer you and want to help you and offer you advice. And with that, I'm hoping this kind of frames what our discussion can be today. I don't know if the other panelists want to talk about things specifically, or have their own presentations, but I thought this would be a way to kind of frame what how we're gonna use this hour. So hopefully I didn't go on too long.
Do you want to call on someone to go next?
So Kim, I have you listed second. Do you have any words of wisdom or advice, especially now that you're in the thick of it?
Yeah, no, that was a great background of everything that I was also told that was very important. I guess I can just give a little brief background of my path of how I got here. So I started my position at UW-Madison here as an assistant professor, tenure track, in the fall of 2019. So I also have the unique experience of having a lab during COVID and starting up a lab during COVID. So we had some unique challenges there as well. So I can maybe share a little bit about that and how to kind of balance big obstacles that come up. But yeah, so I've been in this position since 2019. Just had my first graduate student graduate, and we've kind of, grown over the years. So I'm happy to talk about that in the early phase.
Okay, well, it looks like you're dressed for surgery.
Yeah, I couldn't turn down any invitation from Chris. I have to say I enjoy every meeting that CAIRIBU organized. So, and I want to thank you, Jim, for possibly sharing most of what I was going to share. But if it's okay, I have very few slides that I would like to just share with the group. And the reason why I put this together is because I gave a different title to the whole panel. I thought that I really reflected over my own experience. As I said, Jim, I am senior. I'm in my 26 years of practice as well as my research. So as I look back into how I established research independence, I thought that there might be, let me just, there might be a few things that is worth saying is how you define, independence. I personally feel like the relationship between funding, publications, being an authority in the field, and being running a freestanding lab possibly is what is independence. But I can't deny that, as you said, publishing and making sure that you select the right people for the lab to be lab members is important. The one word I find very pivotal to independence, which is paradoxically work against independence, is collaboration. You can, and you will never be independent in research without having collaborators who would be willing to really sink in on the questions that you have. You have to really keep in mind there are few things that are so important to maintain your reputation in the field. You want to be autonomous to some extent, but at the same time, with your collaborators, you need to maintain integrity, accountability, and you want to maintain ability to really use your resources wisely. And that's when leadership comes through. That's when, time comes through to decide on how you want to do that. Jim called it, or he actually didn't like the elevator pitch. I agree with him. I think what I call the way to describe what you do and have this kind of tachycardia is to really have the public interface to tell people what you do in your research. Being able to translate what you do in your lab to a lay person is the key. And it's different than writing it. It's the ability to say it. I had no experience whatsoever in my research initially, in research in general. And then I went into practice and I picked two topics. And that could be related to the fact that I was very passionate since I was in high school in engineering. So interestingly, with minimal invasive surgery as well as tissue engineering, I always focused on that collaboration with engineers, basic scientists. And for the longest time, I kept on saying, I get dizzy if you take me below the cell membrane. And most recently, getting to work with people like Kim and Chad Vizina and Chris Peniston and many other people in my career, I now know what they can fill in to my ignorance in terms of how we can get things done. And obviously securing grants and institutional support is our key. I define my own research agenda, and I think whoever is going to be really building a lab and become independent, they need to define what the research agenda is going to be. I personally wanted to have two areas of interest. The area of interest was the clinical, which is basically surgical advancements. But at the same time, I was very much interested in bladder tissue engineering. And there's something that really talked to those two areas and domains together, because whatever I wanted to do in the lab, I was able to really talk about what I want to do in the operating room. And I wanted to build a scientific reputation, obviously. And that was through presentations and presenting innovations at any time I have the chance. But There's one thing that Jim pointed out about like you want to be presenting, but you also want to give room to your team members to present. And this is why I realized about 10 years ago that it's time for me to just step down from the podium and make sure that other people will present and take ownership and credit to whatever we do. I think multidisciplinary research team is a key. Again, I'm echoing what Jim have said. I mean, I work with psychologists now, and I work with basic scientists who I never actually thought that I will be working with. But if there's one single statement I would ask everybody to remember is that you need to embrace a lab culture that allows people to say what they are thinking and allow people to really be passionate about what they do, because otherwise you will have really a warm body in the lab and they will not really progress in any way. I tend to ask questions about career and research interests to my team members. I like to know where they are in their career and what they want to do and what kind of research question they care about. The last thing I want to do is to impose on them something that they may not be interested in. And again, mentorship and training, obviously training and becoming a leader will come with time, but overseeing budget is something that I did not have a chance at one point to really monitor very closely. And now I realize that I need to be on top of all those details. So I meet with my administrator very frequently to know where is the money going and how I can use the money in a reasonable way. I do make sure that I prioritize compliance and animal model usage, and I want to make sure that I know what I want to use, and I decide on what the size of the animal model, because that may imply some funding, hemorrhage there if you don't really think about what you're doing. Nothing can surpass collaboration and publishing and disseminating your research. These are really key steps in becoming independent in your research. And I will finish by talking about the challenges and the solutions. I tell people who work with me closely, it's always fun to bring in a problem, but at the same time, embrace a solution at the same time. I find that sometimes people do look at me as if I am I'm the healer for things that I may not find a solution to. So I like to talk to people in terms of what are the solutions they see on their part. I like to always consider that we need to secure funding, whether through peer-reviewed funding or donors funding. And obviously, I have failed multiple times in my life, and I like to remind people that we will go through failures and deal with conflict. And this is why I think the conversation for the next maybe half an hour or so will possibly focus on some of the ways how we can get around failures and dealing with conflict. And again, I am looking forward to the panel, and I will stop here. And thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be at this meeting.